I am sharing a story of brilliance, of learning through play, of a movement that would change the world. It's late August, 1969. Inside San Francisco's dusty, cavernous Palace of Fine Arts, a small group of brilliant misfits, scientists, artists, fabricators, are building an assortment of contraptions in an open machine shop running along the side of the long, sprawling building. A collection of bare tables with various experiments attached are arranged on the floor, while a few pieces of farm equipment helpfully fill the space. Above the shop hangs a handmade sign that reads, "Here is being created a community museum dedicated to awareness." Somewhere beneath that sign, working, tinkering, thinking, is one of the world's most brilliant physicists, the Manhattan Project's Frank Oppenheimer. Yeah, clap it up for Frank. You'll understand why soon. So as the story goes, one day Frank opens the doors. A curious passerby pokes their head in and to ask if the museum is open. The scientists and artists look at each other. It is now. And thus was the illustrious grand opening of the world's first interactive hands-on science center. Science! Yo, there's gonna be so much science. Okay, so today, the museum has sparked a global movement, reaching over 180 million people per year. Thousands and thousands of teachers implement its methodology and curriculum all around the world. And exhibits either built by Frank's museum or originally designed by it are in nearly, literally, almost every single science and technology center in the world. So much science. So Frank Oppenheimer worked on the atomic bomb, but that is not his legacy. Frank's masterpiece being directly responsible for changing how much of the world learns science. Science. If you have ever played with an interactive science exhibit, how many of you have ever played with an interactive science exhibit? Basically, literally all of you, in which case Frank has touched all of your lives. He wholly transformed mine, and he created a blueprint not just for learning, but for a way of being, for a life driven and shaped by curiosity. He created a world that for a singular moment in time was unlike anything else in the planet. Let's rewind. Frank was born in 1921 to a well-to-do New York Jewish family, eight years after his more famous older brother, J. Robert. By 4 or 5, he was taking apart bicycle brakes, and by 8 or 9 was climbing to the tops of trees to watch, yes, lightning storms. By high school, he was using the electric current in his family's apartment to weld things and melt copper and accidentally burn someone. Following the advice of his older brother, Frank went into physics. Unlike Robert, who, very dedicated to academia, just sped through school, Frank took a more circuitous route, earning his PhD at 27. Whatever, it's fine. Because in addition to science, this circuitous route involved political activism. Now, Frank was very deeply troubled by segregation, and so in 1936, he and his wife, Jackie, joined the Communist Party, which has been talked about a lot tonight. I just want to say, like, communism theme. But at the time, it was literally the only American political party that was seriously undertaking issues of race and racism and unemployment. So, however, Frank found the party too authoritarian, and so in 1940, for a variety of reasons, they parted ways. Little did he know that this association would eventually drastically alter his life's path. 5 years later, World War II in full swing, Frank was invited to join his brother to work on the Manhattan Project. Like a number of the other pacifists working on the most horrific weapon the world had ever seen, Frank later expressed regrets on how the bomb was used. And for the rest of his days, when August 6th, the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing came around, Frank would, as his biographer Casey Cole put it, quote, sink into a profound funk. With the end of the war came the rise of McCarthyism and the unjust, life-ruining, yeah, boo at that, please. The unjust, life-ruining persecution of countless individuals by Congress's House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC. In 1949, Frank was brought before them. While, unlike the dog masterpiece, he did not vigorously shake his head at being a communist, he actually admitted to being formerly a member of the Communist Party. He refused to provide other names. And suddenly, yeah, morals. So suddenly, despite being one of the world's most prominent physicists, like one of the world's most successful physicists, all opportunities in physics mysteriously disappeared to Frank. He had been blacklisted. His career as a research scientist was permanently over. But Frank was, well, he was Frank. Having fallen in love with the mountains of Colorado in his youth, he did what anyone would do upon being blacklisted from physics. And by what anyone would do, I mean what literally only Frank Oppenheimer would do. He became a cattle rancher. To be clear, neither Frank nor his wife Jackie knew literally anything about cattle ranching. They didn't realize that the grass, like growing on their property, was actually hay. But they learned. Frank sometimes continuing to putter around in his suit. And eventually he was able to jump through enough of the blacklisting hoops to secure a job teaching at the local high school. Finally, 11 years after being blacklisted, Frank was hired to teach at the University of Colorado in Boulder and packed up the ranch. Yeah. So at UC Boulder, Frank threw himself into teaching, developing many of the philosophies that would later infuse his museum. At Boulder, he advocated for the grade F to be abolished and for a different course structure that would allow students time for aimless exploration and discovery. He also found the labs weary, and so came upon an idea that would change the world. What if, instead of being forced to do a prescribed activity, students could explore experiments, little exhibits demonstrating the physics phenomena that they were studying? Frank started borrowing parts wherever he could find them, eventually reaching 80 experiments exhibits for his students to explore. After visiting science museums in 1965 in Europe, Frank returned convinced that science museums could become exactly the kind of school supplement that kids needed. Science. So, as he would later say often, and I love this quote, nobody ever flunked a science museum. And so in 1968, he and Jackie moved to the groovy city of San Francisco, where he published, yes, a manifesto of sorts, noting that teaching science without props was akin to teaching someone to swim without letting them near water. Yes. Students, he wrote, needed a, quote, woods of natural phenomena to wander and explore and play. And so Frank managed to secure $1 a year lease on the Palace of Fine Arts. Yep. They changed that later. Secured a meager for museums, $50,000 in funding, and began developing the museum like an old-fashioned barn raising, borrowing help and parts from community members and friends, and without literally any announcement, one day Frank just opened the doors. And thus was born the Exploratorium. Its iconic closing bell, which clearly many of you have heard, the dinner bell from the ranch. Now, many of Frank's friends and colleagues noted that being inside the Exploratorium was like being inside Frank's brain. There were no rules. Visitors were expected to touch everything. And if an exhibit broke, that was on the exhibit builder, not the visitor. And Frank insisted that everything be honest, no gimmicks. The visitor was to understand everything that went on in the exhibit. They were to see the shop where the exhibit was built. And Frank's museum was not just about science. He saw art and science as two sides of the same coin. Art, science, two sides, same coin. Okay. Both as a way of understanding the world, and felt that human perception was a critical part to the secondary motive that Frank had behind the museum. So he described the Exploratorium as a, quote, weave of his different interests and experiences, and this included politics. As his biographer, Casey Cole, pictured here with Frank, wrote, quote, by basing his museum around human perception, Frank showed how easy it is for the mind to jump to incorrect conclusions based on unexamined assumptions. At heart, Frank built the Exploratorium as a political institution. Its ultimate goal was to get people so addicted to understanding that they would somehow become inoculated against the clever deceptions of some advertisers and politicians. He would persuade them to use those brains of theirs to get involved, to add to the collective wisdom. The only true way, he thought, to solve the world's pressing global problems. And empowered people it did. One story of Explo legend is of a woman who came to the museum to report that she had wired a lamp by herself because of her experiences at the Exploratorium. Now, to be clear, there were no exhibits on wiring lamps. But by learning that she could, in fact, understand anything, she was empowered to figure it out. Yeah. Asked me why my vacuum parts were scattered all over my living room one day. Yeah. So for this talk, I interviewed a few long-term Exploratorium staff who worked with Frank in the 70s and 80s. And one, Susan Schwarzenberg, describes how he was never patronizing. Once, mid-hippie era, a visitor said how human spirituality could be seen as an aura. She'd seen it on a science thing. And Frank took her over to the heat camera exhibit and smiled as he described the aura as heat from our bodies. So said Susan, quote, I could tell he was maybe rolling his eyes in his head, but the whole point of the museum was just that, learning how to question and decipher what you see. And many of these principles remain to this day. Unlike Frank, the modern-day Exploratorium eschews any murmur of politics, to such a problematic extent that it was only well after the museum moved to Pier 15 in 2013 that a single exhibit with the words climate change was put permanently on the floor. However, we'll talk after. Okay, however, The aforementioned broad pedagogical concepts that founded the Exploratorium really do remain today. And I know because I spent the last 15 years working there. Okay, so as one of Frank's colleagues who I spoke with said, the DNA that founded the museum exists today in all it does. And I do agree to an extent. The modern Exploratorium is certainly the obvious descendant of Frank's museum. It does incredible work in the world, but it is no longer Frank's museum in a few critical ways. In Frank's day, yeah, I know, they're so good. Okay, so in Frank's day, the values behind the Exploratorium's educational approach were consistent with how the museum was run. I'll tell you what I mean by this. Frank's Exploratorium was a horizontal organization where everyone's input was equally valued. Longtime staff member Ron Hipschman told me how they used to have weekly staff meetings where Frank would discuss with and seek input from all employees, like literally all employees, on anything from pedagogy to staff issues to finances. As Ron said, quote, "We would discuss the subject and how we felt and also suggest solutions. And Frank listened and took everybody's opinion into account. Often a group solution was reached at the meetings. Sometimes Frank had to make a decision. But either way, he always made us felt like we were part of the process, and we were." As Larry Shaw, who BT Dubs invented Pi Day at the Exploratorium, said, quote, "The Exploratorium was an anarchy and Frank was our anarch." I love that quote so much. And so in this particular regard, Frank's museum, Frank's Exploratorium, is virtually unrecognizable from the one today. But exactly like Odd Salon, it is my community and one of the most incredible groups of creative nerds I'll ever encounter. Thank you for those of you who are in the audience tonight. Frank's work has impacted my life in the most profound ways. It's given me the confidence to engage with the world in a bolder way, permission to just like insatiably, disgustingly indulge my curiosity in like every way. It's fantastic. And Frank's curiosity bled into all parts of life. He would demonstrate harmonic frequencies with the water glasses at dinner and try to create resonant waves in the bath, especially if they could like empty the bath in one wave, because why not? Oddlings, he was definitely our people. And so, yeah, one of us. So as I wrap up, for now, my work both with the Exploratorium and with live Odd Salons, I can't help but reflect on the deep similarities. The entire premise of Odd Salon, why we are all here right now, encouraging people to indulge their curiosity and empowering amateurs to be experts, like that is dearly after Frank's own heart. And that is actually literally the first thought that I had when I first heard about Odd Salon 9 years ago. So as we conclude, I would like to offer some hopes for both communities. Please, never stop indulging your curiosity. Embrace bold content. Exercise autonomy and ask for forgiveness, not permission, when appropriate. Stop to look at the shadows, the pattern of sunlight through the trees. Never forget your profound ability to influence the world around you. Don't make things too shiny. And don't wallow in disappointment. As Frank said, if he had, quote, "I wouldn't have started the Exploratorium." So today, we are in a history loop, reliving many of the same most prominent issues of Frank's day. The need for his work has never been more poignant. He describes it perfectly, actually, in John Els's Nova film Palace of Delights. And as he says, well, I'll let him tell you.
The basis for social change as well as technical change, I think, is understanding how nature behaves and how people behave. And if one can promote that, if one can create confidence in that, then there's some chance that we won't blow each other up and that we can have a decent society. So the Exploratorium really was founded on a kind of optimism, and I'm not going to stop. I'm going to maintain that optimism.
And so, friends, a toast. May we all be a little less jaded. May we all lead a life devoted to curiosity. May we all be bold, and may we never stop striving to understand. Cheers.